My name is Shelby Steele. I write about social issues, a lot about race. Some might think I write too much about those things. But I do have a big idea, one big idea that I think is worth sharing. My big idea is I would like to, it's probably more a hope than an idea, I would like to see the end of white guilt. What is white guilt? Let me sort of quickly run through that. Certainly by white guilt, I do not mean a guilt of conscience, where you get up in the morning and, oh, terrible things have happened to minorities in the past, so I'm going to flagellate myself. That kind of guilt would not go far. This is a guilt that comes from, I think, a little noticed but profound human event that happened that sort of culminated in the 1960s, and that is the death of white supremacy. Not in the sense that there was no longer any bigotry or racism in the world, but as an idea, it lost its legitimacy. You could no longer organize governments and societies and the world around this idea, certainly in any open way. And the reason this happened is because revolutions across the entire world happened. American Civil Rights Movement being one of those very successful revolutions, ending the institution of segregation that had been around for over 100 years in America. When a society acknowledges its wrongdoing, as happened in America and across much of the West at that time, they become, sadly and probably unfairly, stigmatized with the very sin they've confessed to. Today in America, white Americans are stigmatized as racist. They carry this stigma. It is something that they constantly are under pressure to make sure they live and speak and talk and everything in a way that proves the negative, that they are not racist. This, I think, is one of the biggest forces in American life, and this terror of living under where you're, and of course, if you use the wrong words and you slip up, you can ruin your whole career, as we've seen happen to many people in recent years. So this terror puts whites in, I think, again, a very difficult situation. Most of our social policy, certainly almost all of our policy dealing with race relations, is really much more about the stigma fighting of our institutions and white Americans than it is about solving the problems of race and poverty in the United States of America. 1970, we came forth with a welfare program that gave blacks basically a little bit over subsistence living and asking of them absolutely nothing at all. We then created affirmative action programs that did pretty much the same thing for the black middle class. Here's something you're going to have. You don't have to do anything for it. In fact, you can't fail so much that you won't get it. Well, you always know you're dealing with a white guilt policy when there is a blindness to the people you claim to be helping. No one ever looks at those. The purpose of those programs is not to help the people they claim to help. The purpose of those programs is to reestablish the moral authority of the institutions. Universities assiduously practice affirmative action for many decades now without ever even bothering until it came under attack to evaluate and see whether it worked. Didn't care whether it worked. The point is we have to have the policy or the legitimacy of our institution comes under question. This is white guilt. It has this effect. It doesn't help the people it claims to help. Another thing, of course, it does is it begins to undermine the values that made America a great society in the first place. Those values themselves have now become stigmatized. When you go onto a university campus and you start talking about excellence and merit, they have a stigma of inequality associated with them, again, because they have this, they carry this terrible stigma. I think white guilt even has something to do with the way we fight wars. Regardless of what one's position is on the war, the current one that we're involved in, there has been a certain hesitancy in the way we have conducted that war. There has been a preoccupation with the legitimacy of the war effort, a concern with how we fight it, and how we show ourselves to be really a civilized and humane society. That preoccupation is white guilt, and that preoccupation is quite different than actually going in and winning the war. And it undermines what the purpose of warfare is, and we end up in these long, protracted wars that go on forever, in which we're fighting a publicity campaign as much as we are fighting a war. Well, that's my big idea. I think the solution to it is that we have to focus on fairness. Fairness is our only way out of this. There is no redemption. There is no, America's history is what America's history was. It's left the scars it's left. And public policy is not going to ever be very effective in terms of remediating that or redeeming us in any way. And again, I think we need to go back to our focus on simple fairness without regard, always, always without regard to what group you may belong to. Talk to you soon.